And he said, I want you to know I bought a bunch of copies of this and gave it to people that really, it profoundly changed them. He said, one of the people I gave it to was my old buddy, Alexander Haig. And he actually said that Al Haig said to him that he was stunned by the book, that he had never seen somebody who had gotten as close to the heart of how things really work as in this book. And I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but here I am doing that. Yes. You know, this is not to take away from them at all, because I think they're all very intelligent, capable, well-meaning people. But they all work within the universe in which they find themselves. They're all employees of large corporations that own vast empires. Historically, NBC was always tied in with General Electric, and you would never see anything about the military contracting business. So I think these people are aware of the fact that they hang by a slender reed. You know, a lot of people get excited by these theories that are very simplified, that there's the Bilderberg group or the Masons or the something, you know, whatever it is, the Illuminati or something. And, you know, that's just too pat. What you're talking about people with a different mindset. All of you here have a certain, maybe a kind of a humanitarian, warm bent toward your world and your fellow beings. There are people who don't, and there are people who sit at home, and even amongst themselves, they're not candid with their own family about their feelings and what's going on, but they do tell them, this is what our family stands for, these are our holdings, that was our plantation that Castro took, you know, this is for you and your kids, and so on, and that's their mindset. And to themselves, they're not evil. They're good people who are upholding a particular value system. And so the they is people. Basically, I mean, they have stacked the deck in favor of themselves. And this is the story. The story is an unlevel playing field. And so ordinary people can never get a fair shake. People work hard all their lives. They do everything they were told to do. They go to church. They get a mortgage, they do everything right, and everything's taken away from them, and they become bitter because they say, how does this work? I don't understand this. We were told America is a good place, and everything works out if you just hold up your end of the bargain, and then they saw that it was a ruse, basically. Everything. The Kennedy assassination, if you look at it carefully, it may have been the beginning of the end of democracy in this country, because a man who was doing, we're learning more and more through recent revelations, was doing more and more to challenge the conventional way of things and to try to achieve world peace, various other things, was gunned down. And we were told it was a lone kook, as we're always told they're lone kooks. We'll have a new story up on Who, What, Why tomorrow about threats to Obama. And you will see that this is an ongoing phenomenon, that every president is scared that the same thing that has happened to leaders the world over could happen to them, and that they are not immune to it in this country, that there are people in this country who have openly testified that they support putting bullets in the heads of foreign leaders who cause problems for American corporations. So the only question is, do those people not favor doing that when the stakes are even higher at home? And so with the Kennedy assassination, for example, is one of the many things we've looked into. I was intrigued, to say the least, while working on Family of Secrets, after I had discovered that George H.W. Bush had this past in intelligence work back through the 70s, the 60s, and even the 50s, I wanted to reconstruct his whole life and see what he was doing. And so I came across this item first reported in Kitty Kelly's book, that George H.W. Bush, in an interview, somebody had asked him, where were you when Kennedy was shot? What do you remember? You know, what were your reactions at the time? And he just sort of froze. And he said, you know, I just don't remember where I was. And, you know, Kitty Kelly thought that was interesting, and she wrote a half a page on that. I thought that was interesting, and I spent years on it. And the result is 4 chapters in Family of Secrets of all new information on the Kennedy assassination. Now, I came to that as an agnostic, and this is the key to how we do our work. We don't have a dog in the fight. I didn't have any position whether Oswald did it, whether the Queen of England did it, or McDonald's did it, or, you know, I didn't have any position because I didn't know. They don't know how anything works. Americans are some of the most poorly educated, most propagandized people on earth. And I can tell you, I've been in probably 60 or 70 countries. I've never seen anything like it. Even I go to the Himalayas and I talk to people in little villages and they seem to know more than a lot of people in our biggest cities here. We're totally closed off. We're bombarded with crap. You know, I go to the gym and everybody's talking about J-Lo and, I don't know, I'm probably already out of date on that, whoever, and they're all lobotomized with these, these magazines about who's marrying who and what it's like for an actress to have a child, and I mean, that stuff's all made up, that's all made up by their publicity people, because basically I know a lot of actors, and believe me, they are not more interesting than you, they're less interesting than you. They're less interesting than the average person, because all they do is worry about acting and fame. And yet this entire fake industry has been created. So Watergate, one of the things I discovered was that Watergate was not what I thought it was. I grew up thinking that Richard Nixon was behind Watergate, and I learned that he wasn't. This is all from my new research. Richard Nixon was deposed in a military coup. He was framed. You want to read more about it? All the details in there. That's the stuff that Alexander Haig thought was so brilliant, because he knew what happened, because he was there. And this is not a plot like the movie Eyes Wide Shut of a small number of people in a room with, incantations and so on. This is a consensus. This is how things happen. And people understand, and I've worked for dozens of major brand magazines and newspapers and TV shows and radio shows in the United States and all over the world. And every one of them, if you're going to succeed there, you learn what you can and cannot do. And so, for example, 9/11, you can't write anything on it. You just know that. And if you turn in a story, the editor's like, oh God, this crackpot stuff, and that editor doesn't even necessarily believe that themselves, but they know because they've tried to get other stories approved, and somebody else higher up said, oh, this crackpot stuff. So it's never that anybody's told you will lose your job. It's never that it's a formal thing. It's more insidious than that. In fact, to me, and I covered many of the revolutions in Eastern Europe. I was in pre-Rwanda massacres, Hutu, Tutsi in Central Africa, all over the world covering major uprisings and so forth. And I have to say that there is no mind control like that which we have right here, because it's the most insidious kind. It's in our own minds. And nobody has to threaten us, and nobody has to tell us something, because people tell me all the time, I'd love to help you out, but I really don't want the IRS coming after me, or I can't afford this, or whatever. I mean, what are they saying? What are they saying? They can't exercise their constitutional rights because there's retribution. That is fear, and that's very, very dangerous. The thing about drugs that people don't understand is drugs are a form of currency. This is why drugs will never be legalized, even though that seems to be a logical approach to many people. They'll never be legalized because they're valuable, illegal. And people are always looking for convertible forms of currency that can be used to pay people to do things. There's currency, there's gold. In Family of Secrets, I have a whole chapter on the secret history of gold and how what appears to have been a decades-long operation that may be continuing to the present day, where elements of U.S. intelligence, possibly working with other Western intelligence, have been using stashes of former Japanese wartime gold to fund unauthorized covert operations all over the world. Gold, drugs, etc. And so these people, where they look the other way, where they deal with allies like a Noriega who's maybe involved with drugs and so forth, it's not that they like drugs or they want to hook people and think they're good. They just are business people, and they're very practical about their value. But let me say that a lot of the figures who were heavily covered by the media and vilified, that there's a reason for this, and it is, to my mind, sort of insidious on its own. When you focus on Dick Cheney or Karl Rove, or Sarah Palin or Donald Rumsfeld or something, what you're doing is you're personifying a systemic problem in a person, and you're getting angry. You're sort of creating these cartoon characters. Dick Cheney never did anything on his own. That secret task force where they, before the Iraq invasion, where they put up those maps and which oil companies wanted what parts of Iraq to drill in. I mean, that wasn't his own idea. It wasn't his idea that he should run Halliburton. He was selected by a group of businessmen on a hunting trip, and they just told him, Dick, you've been chosen to run Halliburton. He said, okay. So we need to understand that these figures that we're familiar with are figureheads, and it's not good enough to just focus on them. So the question was about 9/11 and why the media doesn't cover all the non-conspiratorial things that just seem to be pretty evident that are out there. You know, people don't realize this, but reporters, they always talk about the liberal media, and I always think that's a trick, because reporters are not really liberal. They're liberal only in that kind of way that, you know, everybody's kind of liberal in the sort of way, you know, the underdog, you know, bleeding heart generally. But basically, reporters are very cautious people. The media basically is a lot of very conventional people who work for large corporations and who have mortgages and have kids going to expensive colleges and things like that. They're not really looking for trouble. If you get together for a beer with journalists, they will tell you that privately they'll tell you all kinds of stories. And they'll say it's just not going to fly. Big stories that are really, really disturbing, that upset people, are not going to be told because they're for-profit businesses, and they, you know, open the New York Times and it's got ads for, you know, $2 million condos and, you know, $50,000 jewelry pieces and yachts and what have you. And, you know, people aren't going to be buying those things if they think that democracy is on its way down the tubes or things are really bad. And so there's a kind of a self-censorship. 9/11 is an extremely big, highly disturbing story, even with just the conventional story. They didn't even dig into the conventional story. You know, those. Let's accept that those 19 people were on those planes. Who were they really? I never saw good reporting where people really went to the Middle East and spoke extensively to people who knew them and their families. There was a tiny bit about that, but not much. And so at Who, What, Why, we can at least begin doing the work that the mainstream itself could have done and didn't. All right, thank you very much for coming. I enjoyed it.